Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, in this video, I want to inspire you to not be poor. And I know what you're thinking. Agustin, it ain't that easy. But hear me out. I might just be a guy on the internet, but I could be onto something. Because after thinking about it, I have come to the conclusion that it is more expensive to be poor than to be rich. As absurd as this sounds, when you don't have money, life is a lot more expensive. I mean, it's probably 25% more expensive because when you don't have money, you run into a lot of problems that make life more expensive. You get taken advantage of left and right by the system because the system preys on the poor. It's messed up, but the way our society is set up is to take advantage of people who have very little money and profit off of them. To take what little money poor people have so corporate executives can afford their $10 million vacation home in the Hamptons. And this system works so well because when you have little money, you don't have a choice. You don't have a say over what's happening, but maybe, just maybe, if you understand how the system takes advantage of poor people, you can take steps in your life to take control of your finances and your life will be cheaper. And so in this video, as silly and unrealistic as it sounds, I want to inspire you to not be poor, to not fall victim to the system. And I want to explain exactly how the system takes advantage of the poor. And by understanding these little tactics the system uses, I hope that it will inspire you to take the slow, long journey to taking control over your finances so that your life will be cheaper. So let's begin. Number one. Interest rates. One of the advantages of having money is that when you want something, all you have to do is hand over the money and you get the product or service. However, when you don't have money, it's a little bit more complicated. You run into interest rates. I heard a pretty crazy statistic the other day that said in the course of their lifetime, the average American will pay $160,000 in interest alone. And that consists of a mortgage, auto loans, student loans, and credit card interest. We often don't think about how much money we're spending in interest until you see a statistic like that. I mean, for the average person, that is 3 to 4 years of salary. And interest rates, especially high interest rates, affect poor people the most because they don't have the money to pay up front. So they end up throwing away thousands of dollars every single year just on interest. And although not all loans are avoidable like a mortgage, regardless of whatever your situation is, you can make intentional decisions in your life to limit how much you take out in loans by doing things like getting a cheaper used car instead of an expensive new one, not getting a credit card and paying in cash, save up until you can afford something and then buy it. Things are a lot cheaper when you don't have to pay for interest on top of the purchase. And although you can't always avoid borrowing money with a high interest rate, sometimes you can. And if you can make intentional decisions to limit how much you borrow and how much you borrow on interest, you can save a lot of money over the course of a lifetime. Number two, predatory bank fees. If you have at least $1 in your bank account and your bank is charging you something, you need to leave that bank. Because what banks do is that you give them your money to watch over. Then they go out and lend that money to other people and collect interest from those loans or investments. Basically, they're making money off of your money. And so if you have $1 in your bank account, they should not be charging you a single penny. However, unfortunately, many banks take advantage of poor, low-income people by charging them predatory fees like monthly maintenance fees, overdraft fees, paper statement fees, or lost card fees. And most of these fees are targeted to poor people. They only apply to people who have very little money in their bank account. And although these fees can be small, maybe even under $5, you shouldn't be paying any fees to your bank if you have money in your bank account. And you can avoid pretty much all these fees if you make intentional choices to be conscious of if your bank is charging you. Leave your bank if they are, and change to a bank with no fees. There are so many banks, especially online banks, that don't charge any fees. And although it might be annoying and take some time to leave your bank, it's important because they shouldn't be charging you anything, especially if you have very little money. That $5, $10 they're taking every month is a lot of money. So make sure that your bank isn't charging you any money because they shouldn't be. Number 3, bad quality foods. In America, it is actually cheaper to buy processed unhealthy food than natural healthy food. Ain't that something? I mean, for $3, you can either buy a McDouble or a pound of asparagus. And if you don't have that much money, you're probably going to choose the McDouble over the asparagus because it's going to fill you up. And for people who are struggling financially, they are almost forced to have a diet of unhealthy foods like sugary cereals instead of eggs and fruit, fast food instead of home-cooked food, and processed snacks instead of fruits and vegetables. And although it might seem like you're spending less money, in the long run, you end up having to spend so much money due to the consequences of this bad diet. You end up spending so much money on things like doctor's visits, prescription medication, and medical devices due to the effects of a bad diet. And although grocery prices keep going up and healthy foods become more and more expensive, it's important to see a healthy diet as an investment and just do your best to make intentional decisions to have a healthier diet by doing things like buying cheaper frozen fruits and vegetables, stop buying empty calorie foods, and choose cheaper grocery stores. It is so messed up to think that processed unhealthy food is actually cheaper than natural healthy food because it forces low-income people into an unhealthy diet and ultimately leads to so many expensive medical fees down the road. However, if you just do your best and be strategic about what type of food you buy, you can avoid so many medical costs down the road and save so much money. Number 4, being unable to prevent expensive things from happening. Imagine having a tire that badly needs to be replaced, but since you don't have much money, you can't afford to buy a new one right away, so instead you just continue driving on it. And then one day when you're on the highway, it pops. You're going to have to spend a lot more money because that new tire might have cost you $150. But because you couldn't afford it and you put it off, now your bill's going to be much higher. You're going to have to spend $150 for the new tire, $200 for the tow truck, and minus $100 in lost wages because you couldn't come to work. And I would say a scenario like that is pretty common. It's not always with the tire, but it usually has something to do with a car, where you can't afford to fix something, and then the problem gets so severe that it ends up costing you so much money. And in that tire scenario, because they couldn't afford to prevent the accident by getting a new tire, they ended up having to spend a lot more money because all these other things happened. And that's the problem with being poor and having no money. You're unable to prevent expensive things from getting extremely expensive. When you're unable to fix something right away, you usually end up running to a more severe, expensive problem down the road. And although we can't prevent problems from coming into our lives, we can make intentional decisions to prepare for these bad events by doing things like limit how many bad things can go wrong in your life. Find a cheaper alternative in the meantime, maybe like a used tire, and start an emergency fund. When you put off an expensive expense, it's usually just a ticking time bomb, and down the road it just becomes extremely expensive. And no one is immune to these surprises that we have in life. But if you take steps today to start preparing for these expenses, you could possibly prevent an expense from getting extremely expensive. Number 5, no time to get out of poverty. If you look at our society, the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. I mean, in the last 30 years, the share of rich wealth has steadily been increasing, and the share of middle and lower class wealth has steadily been decreasing. And there are many reasons for this, and I'm not going to go in detail of all these different reasons, but one of the big reasons is time. When you're poor and don't have any money, you don't have time to think about anything except putting food on the table and keeping up with bills. You don't have time to learn new skills or find good deals or look for a better job. Instead, you just get trapped in this vicious circle of living paycheck to paycheck and being taken advantage of. And although the system is unfair and in favor of the rich, if you take intentional steps to do things like adopt frugal habits, start budgeting, and take control over your finances, you can buy back some of your time. You can use that money to get out of this scarcity mindset and not live paycheck to paycheck and not be a victim to this brutal system that preys on the poor. And in our messed up society, it is actually more expensive to be poor than it is to be rich. You can't afford to be poor in this dog-eat-dog system. So take intentional steps in your life to do the slow, long journey to have more control over your finances, and life will be more affordable. And with that, muchas gracias. Que tengan un buen día. Video 107. Nos vemos, chicos.